Imagine standing at a cosmic intersection where a billion believers point in different directions, each absolutely certain their path leads to ultimate truth. A Christian missionary in Manila proclaims salvation through Christ alone. A Hindu priest in Varanasi teaches that all paths lead to the same divine summit. A Buddhist monk in Kyoto suggests there is no God to reach at all. Meanwhile, a Muslim scholar in Cairo insists that submission to Allah is the only way. They can't all be right, or can they? This question has sparked wars, ended friendships, and kept philosophers debating for centuries. Today, we're going to find out if there's actually an answer. Welcome to Logic Over Spirit, where we tackle the questions that keep philosophers awake at night and send family dinners into awkward silence. I'm your host, and today we're diving into one of the most controversial questions in human history. Can all religions be true? Now, before you jump to the comments section to defend your worldview or attack someone else's, hear me out. This isn't about attacking anyone's faith or defending atheism. This isn't about proving your grandmother wrong or validating your own beliefs. This is about something far more interesting. The logic, the contradictions, and the fascinating attempts humanity has made to reconcile the irreconcilable. Here's what makes this question so compelling. On one hand, we live in an age that values tolerance, diversity, and open-mindedness. We're told that all perspectives are valid, that truth is relative, and that claiming your religion is the only correct one is arrogant and dangerous. On the other hand, we have these ancient traditions making very specific, very exclusive claims about the nature of reality, and those claims directly contradict each other. So which is it? Is religious tolerance about accepting that all faiths are equally true, or is it about respecting people while acknowledging that their beliefs might be wrong? Can we have our cake and eat it too? Can we embrace diversity while still believing in objective truth? Here's what we're going to explore in detail. First, we'll examine what it actually means for something to be true, because this matters more than you might think. Then we'll look at the fundamental claims religions make and whether they're compatible. We'll investigate the popular idea that all religions are basically the same, just wearing different cultural clothing. We'll explore whether truth even matters, or if sincerity and good intentions are enough. We'll examine the famous parables and metaphors people use to argue for religious pluralism. And by the end, you'll have a clear, logical framework for thinking about these questions yourself. So whether you're a devout believer who prays 5 times a day, a curious skeptic who thinks it's all mythology, or somewhere in between, stick around. Because what we're about to uncover will challenge how you think about truth, belief, and the nature of reality itself. And fair warning, the answer might not be what you expect. It might not be what you want to hear, but it will be honest, and it will be based on logic rather than wishful thinking. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Truth Problem. Before we can answer whether all religions can be true, we need to tackle a more fundamental question. What does true even mean? And I know what you're thinking. Come on, everyone knows what true means. But stick with me, because this is where most discussions about religion go off the rails. In everyday life, we use the word true pretty casually. It's true that Paris is in France. It's true that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. It's true that the Earth orbits the sun. These statements correspond to reality. They describe the world as it actually is, independent of what anyone believes or feels about it. This is called the correspondence theory of truth, and it's the most common and intuitive understanding of truth. A statement is true if it matches reality. If it doesn't match reality, it's false. Pretty straightforward, right? But here's where things get complicated. When we talk about religious claims, we're not just talking about geography or chemistry or astronomy. We're talking about claims like God exists, Jesus is the Son of God, reincarnation is real, there is no permanent self, Muhammad received revelations from Allah, the universe is a manifestation of Brahman. These are metaphysical claims, claims about the fundamental nature of reality that go beyond what we can simply observe with our 5 senses. Now, at this point in the conversation, Someone usually raises their hand and says, well, religious truth is different from scientific truth. It's personal truth, spiritual truth, or subjective truth. Maybe what's true for you isn't true for me, and that's okay. We can all have our own truth. And this is where we need to pump the brakes. Because if we're going to have an honest conversation about whether all religions can be true, we can't just redefine truth to mean whatever feels right to you. That's not having a discussion. That's abandoning the question entirely. Think about it this way. If I say it's raining outside and you say it's not raining outside, we can't both be describing reality accurately. Either water is falling from the sky or it isn't. Now, we might have different feelings about the rain. You might love the sound of rain on the roof. I might hate getting wet. You might find rain romantic while I find it depressing. Those are subjective experiences, and they can both be true simultaneously. But the fact of whether it's raining, that's not subjective. That's objective reality. The same principle applies to religious claims about reality. Either there is one God, or there are many gods, or there are no gods. Either consciousness persists after death in some form, or it doesn't. Either Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead, or he didn't. Either reincarnation happens, or it doesn't. Either there is a transcendent reality beyond the physical universe, or everything that exists is material. These are claims about what is actually real, not just about what makes people feel good or what provides psychological comfort. This matters tremendously because when religions make contradictory claims about reality, they can't all be accurately describing reality. That's not being intolerant or closed-minded or disrespectful. That's just basic logic. It's the law of non-contradiction, which states that contradictory propositions cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time. If statement A is true, then not A cannot also be true. Let me give you an example that makes this crystal clear. Christianity claims that Jesus is God incarnate, the second person of the Trinity. Islam explicitly denies this. The Quran states very clearly that Allah has no son, that claiming Jesus is the Son of God is blasphemy, and that the Trinity is a false doctrine. Now, both religions can't be right about this. Either Jesus is God or he isn't. Either the Trinity is true or it's false. These aren't two different perspectives on the same truth. They're contradictory claims. Or consider the question of what happens after death. Christianity generally teaches that each person lives one life, dies once, and then faces judgment leading to eternal heaven or hell. Hinduism teaches that the soul undergoes countless reincarnations, being reborn into different bodies based on karma accumulated in previous lives, until finally achieving moksha, liberation from the cycle of rebirth. Buddhism, in many of its forms, teaches that there is no permanent soul to be reincarnated at all, just a stream of consciousness that continues until nirvana is achieved. These aren't complementary ideas. They're mutually exclusive claims about what actually happens. Now here's what's interesting. Most people intuitively understand this in every other area of life. If a doctor says you have cancer and another doctor says you don't have cancer, you don't conclude that both doctors are right from their own perspectives. You understand that one of them is wrong, or maybe both are wrong and you need a third opinion. You recognize that there's an objective fact of the matter about whether cancer cells are present in your body. But when it comes to religion, we suddenly start talking about personal truth and different paths and multiple perspectives all being valid. Why? Often it's because we want to be respectful. We don't want to tell someone their deeply held beliefs are false. We don't want to seem arrogant or closed-minded. And those are admirable impulses. But respect for people doesn't require abandoning logic. We can treat people with dignity and kindness while still acknowledging that beliefs can be true or false. So let's establish this as our foundation. When we ask if all religions can be true, we're asking if their core claims about reality can all simultaneously correspond to the way things actually are. We're not asking if they all contain some wisdom. We're not asking if they all make people feel good. We're asking if they can all be accurate descriptions of reality. And with that foundation in place, we now need to look at what religions actually claim. Because maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe the contradictions aren't as stark as I'm suggesting. Let's find out. Chapter 2. What religions actually claim. Let's get specific and detailed. When we talk about religions, we're usually referring to the major world religions. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Sikhism, and various other traditions. And while there's enormous diversity within each tradition, more diversity than most people realize, they make some very clear, very specific claims about the nature of reality. Let's start with Christianity. Christianity claims that God is a Trinity: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. 3 persons in one divine being. This isn't just poetic language or a metaphor. It's a specific metaphysical claim about the nature of God. Christianity claims that Jesus of Nazareth was God incarnate, fully God and fully human. It claims that he died on a cross as a sacrifice for humanity's sins, that he was buried, and that he physically rose from the dead 3 days later. It claims that salvation, being made right with God and gaining eternal life, comes through faith in Jesus Christ. Not through good works, not through following rules, not through meditation, but through trusting in what Jesus did. Christianity teaches that there is eternal life after death, and that people will spend eternity in either heaven, in the presence of God, or hell, separated from God. These aren't vague spiritual principles. These are specific claims about historical events and metaphysical reality. Now let's look at Islam. Islam claims that there is one God, Allah, and that he is absolutely one, not 3 in 1. It explicitly rejects the Trinity as a fundamental misunderstanding of God's nature. Islam claims that Muhammad is Allah's final prophet, the seal of the prophets, and that the Quran is God's final and perfect revelation to humanity. It explicitly addresses Jesus. Islam teaches that Jesus was a great prophet, a messenger of God, born of a virgin, who performed miracles. But he was not the Son of God. He was not divine. And crucially, he did not die on the cross. According to Islamic teaching, it only appeared that Jesus was crucified, but God rescued him. So the crucifixion, which is the central event in Christianity, Islam says never actually happened. Salvation in Islam comes through submission to Allah's will as revealed in the Quran and the example of Muhammad. There is a day of judgment coming when all will be held accountable for their deeds, and people will go to paradise or hell based on their faith and actions. Already we can see irreconcilable differences. Christianity says Jesus is God. Islam says he's not. Christianity says Jesus died on the cross and rose again. Islam says he didn't die on the cross. Christianity says salvation is by faith in Christ. Islam says salvation is by submission to Allah and following Islamic law. These aren't different ways of saying the same thing. These are contradictory claims. Now let's turn to Hinduism, which is actually a family of related traditions rather than a single religion. But most Hindu traditions teach that ultimate reality is Brahman, an impersonal, infinite consciousness or being that underlies and permeates all existence. The many gods and goddesses in Hinduism, Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, Durga, Ganesha, and countless others are often understood as manifestations or aspects of this ultimate reality. Different Hindu schools disagree about the details, but most teach that the individual self, the Atman, is eternal. It's not created at birth and doesn't cease at death. Instead, it undergoes samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, being reincarnated into different bodies, different life forms, based on karma, the moral consequences of actions from previous lives. The ultimate goal in most Hindu traditions is moksha, liberation from this cycle of rebirth and the realization of Atman's unity with Brahman. Notice how different this is from Christianity and Islam. In Hinduism, there's not one God making exclusive demands, but an ultimate reality that can be approached through countless paths and worshipped in countless forms. There's no single life followed by eternal heaven or hell, but endless reincarnations. The goal isn't reconciliation with a personal God, but liberation from the cycle of existence itself. Buddhism, which emerged from the Hindu tradition but diverged significantly, takes yet another direction. Many Buddhist traditions teach anatman, the doctrine of no self. There is no permanent soul or atman. What we call the self is just a temporary collection of physical and mental processes. The five aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These come together temporarily and create the illusion of a permanent self, but there's no unchanging essence, no eternal soul. When you die, there's no self that goes to heaven or hell or gets reincarnated into another body. Instead, there's a process of continuation, like a flame passing from one candle to another. The flame continues, but it's not the same flame. This is a profound difference from both Christian and Hindu teaching about the soul. Buddhism teaches that suffering is caused by attachment, craving, and ignorance about the true nature of reality. The goal is nirvana, the cessation of suffering achieved by letting go of attachment and seeing reality as it truly is. Some forms of Buddhism don't posit a creator God at all. The Buddha himself refused to answer questions about whether God exists, considering them irrelevant to the path of liberation from suffering. Judaism, the oldest of the Abrahamic traditions, teaches strict monotheism. There is one God, Yahweh, who created the universe and entered into a covenant relationship with the Jewish people. The Messiah, the anointed one who will redeem Israel and bring about God's kingdom, has not yet come. This is a direct contradiction with Christianity, which claims Jesus is that Messiah. In Judaism, Jesus is not divine, not the Messiah, just a historical figure who lived and died like anyone else. Judaism doesn't focus as centrally on the afterlife or personal salvation as Christianity does. The emphasis is more on living righteously in this world according to God's law, the Torah, and maintaining the covenant relationship between God and the Jewish people. Sikhism, founded in the 15th century, teaches that there is one God who is the creator of all things. Sikhs reject the caste system of Hinduism and the ritualism they saw in both Hinduism and Islam. Salvation comes through meditation on God's name, living ethically, and serving others. Sikhs believe in reincarnation and karma, similar to Hinduism, but they also believe in one God, similar to the Abrahamic faiths. So Sikhism blends elements from different traditions, but in doing so, it contradicts both. It agrees with Islam that there's one God, but disagrees about who the prophets are and what God requires. It agrees with Hinduism about reincarnation, but rejects the authority of the Vedas and the caste system. Now, look at these claims side by side. Really think about what each tradition is asserting. They're not saying the same thing in different languages. They're not describing the same reality from different cultural perspectives. They're making fundamentally incompatible assertions about what exists, what happens after death, how the universe came to be, what God is like if God exists at all, and how humans should live. Either Jesus is God incarnate or he isn't. Either the self is eternal or it's an illusion, or it's created at conception. Either there's one God or many gods, or no God at all. Either reincarnation happens based on karma, or people die once and face judgment, or consciousness simply ceases. Either Muhammad received genuine revelations from God, or he didn't. Either the Torah is God's law for all time, or it's been superseded by the New Testament, or it's one path among many. This isn't like different witnesses describing the same car accident from slightly different angles, where the accounts vary in details but agree on the basic facts. This is like one witness saying there was a car accident, another saying it was a plane crash, a third saying it was an earthquake, and a fourth saying nothing happened at all. They can't all be accurate, and yet billions of sincere, intelligent, thoughtful people hold these contradictory beliefs. They've built their lives around them, found meaning in them, organized societies based on them. So the question becomes urgent and personal. If they can't all be true, how do we make sense of this? How do we avoid the conclusion that billions of people are simply mistaken about the most important questions in existence? One popular answer is to argue that the differences are superficial, that deep down all religions are really teaching the same core truths. Let's examine that claim carefully. Chapter 3. The Perennial Philosophy. One of the most popular and appealing attempts to reconcile all religions is called perennialism, or the perennial philosophy. This view says that all religions are essentially expressing the same ultimate truth, just using different cultural forms, different languages, different symbols, different stories. But beneath the surface differences, they're all pointing to the same spiritual reality. The metaphor that gets used constantly goes like this. Different religions are like different paths up the same mountain. Some paths are steep and challenging, others are gentle and winding. Some go through dense forests, others cross rocky terrain. Some paths are ancient and well-worn, others are newer and less traveled. But ultimately, they all lead to the same summit. They all reach the same peak. They all arrive at the same divine truth, the same ultimate reality, the same enlightenment. So it doesn't really matter which path you take. What matters is that you're climbing, that you're seeking, that you're making spiritual progress. This sounds beautiful, doesn't it? It's peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, respectful. It's the kind of thing that gets said at interfaith gatherings and posted as inspirational quotes on social media with backgrounds of sunsets and mountains. It makes us feel good about humanity. It suggests we're all on the same team, all seeking the same truth, just approaching it differently. Who wouldn't want this to be true? The problem is, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and there are multiple serious problems with it. First, this view requires us to ignore, minimize, or radically reinterpret the actual claims religions make. As we just saw in detail, religions aren't making vague gestures toward the divine or offering general spiritual wisdom that could mean anything. They're making specific, detailed, concrete claims about God, the soul, salvation, the afterlife, moral law, and the nature of reality itself. To say they're all describing the same thing, you have to either ignore most of what they explicitly teach or claim that when they say very different things, they secretly mean the same thing, and the believers themselves just don't realize it. Think about how patronizing that is. It's like telling a Christian, I know you think Jesus is the only way to God, but actually you're wrong about your own beliefs. All paths work. Or telling a Muslim, I know the Quran says those who associate partners with Allah commit an unforgivable sin, but that's just cultural packaging. Actually, the Trinity is fine. You're essentially claiming to understand these religions better than the billions of people who have practiced them for centuries, better than the scholars who have devoted their lives to studying them, better than the founders and prophets who established them. Second, many religions explicitly reject the perennialist view. It's not that I'm imposing a rigid, literal interpretation on them. They themselves claim exclusivity. Orthodox Christianity explicitly teaches that Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's not metaphorical. That's a claim to exclusivity. The Quran explicitly states that Islam is the final complete revelation and that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. It doesn't say, well, other paths work too. Traditional Buddhism teaches that only by following the Noble Eightfold Path can you achieve nirvana. It doesn't say any sincere religious practice will get you there. So perennialism isn't a view that emerges from the religions themselves. It's a view imposed on them from outside, and one that most traditional forms of these religions would reject. A devout Hindu might believe that all paths ultimately lead to Brahman, and some Hindu schools do teach this. But a traditional Muslim would strongly disagree. A committed Christian would reject it. An Orthodox Jew would find it incompatible with the exclusive covenant relationship between God and Israel. Third, and this is crucial, perennialism is itself a specific philosophical and religious position. It's not a neutral view that somehow rises above all religions and sees them objectively. It's a competing claim about religious truth that happens to contradict most traditional religious beliefs. When you say all religions are really the same, You're not being neutral. You're making a claim. You're asserting a particular view about the nature of religious truth. And most religions disagree with that claim. Here's an analogy that makes this clear. Imagine you're a vegetarian for ethical reasons. You genuinely believe that killing animals for food is morally wrong. You've thought deeply about this, you've made sacrifices to live consistently with this belief, and it's a core part of your identity and values. Now someone comes along and says, actually, vegetarianism and meat eating are just different expressions of the same nutritional philosophy. They're both equally valid paths to nourishment. One isn't more right than the other. They're just different cultural approaches to food. You'd probably object, right? You'd say, no, you're missing the point entirely. I'm not just choosing a different diet. I have different ethical beliefs about what's right and wrong. I think meat eating causes unnecessary suffering. I think it's morally problematic. This isn't about cultural preference or different paths to the same goal. This is about right and wrong, about harm and compassion, about fundamental moral truth. That's how committed religious believers feel when you tell them all religions are really the same. They're not making aesthetic choices about which spiritual path appeals to them. They're making truth claims about reality, and those claims matter to them. Fourth, if all religions really are just different cultural expressions of the same truth, then why are there any differences at all? If everyone throughout history has been encountering the same divine reality, why didn't they all come to the same conclusions about it? Why would God or ultimate reality or whatever we want to call it reveal itself in ways that lead to completely contradictory beliefs? Why would it tell Christians that Jesus is God, but tell Muslims that's blasphemy? Why would it tell Hindus that the self is eternal, but tell Buddhists that the self is an illusion? The perennialist might respond, well, people interpreted their experiences through their cultural lenses. Their societies shaped how they understood the divine. And that's probably true to some extent. But if that's the case, then we're admitting that religions aren't giving us accurate information about ultimate reality. We're saying they're human interpretations shaped by culture, psychology, and history. We're saying they're more like art or poetry than like science or philosophy, expressions of human experience rather than descriptions of objective truth. And again, that's not how religions present themselves. But here's where someone might push back. Maybe I'm being too focused on beliefs and doctrines and truth claims. Maybe the essence of religion isn't about believing the right things. Maybe it's about something else entirely. Let's explore that objection. Chapter 4. Does truth even matter? At this point, some people throw up their hands and say, look, maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing. Maybe religion isn't fundamentally about believing correct propositions about metaphysics. Maybe it's about ethics, how to be a good person. Maybe it's about community, belonging to something larger than yourself. Maybe it's about spiritual experience, moments of transcendence and connection. Maybe it's about finding meaning and purpose in life. Maybe sincerity matters more than accuracy. Maybe what's important is that people are genuinely seeking, that they're trying to live good lives, that they're finding comfort and hope and motivation to be better. Maybe the truth of specific doctrinal claims is beside the point. This is what we might call a pragmatic or instrumentalist approach to religion. It asks not if this is true, but does this work? Does it make people better? Does it reduce suffering and increase flourishing? Does it provide psychological benefits? Does it help people cope with death and loss and meaninglessness? Does it inspire charity and compassion and justice? If Buddhism makes someone a more compassionate person, if Christianity gives someone hope in suffering, if Islam provides someone with purpose and direction, who cares whether reincarnation is literally real, or whether Jesus literally rose from the dead, or whether Muhammad literally received revelations from Allah? And I'll admit, there's something appealing about this approach. We've all met people from different faiths who are kind, generous, wise, compassionate, and living admirable lives. We've seen religious communities do tremendous good in the world, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, caring for the sick, providing education, and fighting injustice. We've witnessed the comfort religion brings to people facing death or tragedy. If all that good comes from these different religions, isn't that what really matters? Isn't that the proof that they're all valid in the way that counts? But this approach has serious, serious problems. Let me walk through them carefully. First, and most fundamentally, it abandons the religion's own self-understanding. Most religions don't present themselves as useful fictions, therapeutic techniques, or inspiring mythology. They present themselves as true descriptions of reality. Christianity doesn't say believing in the resurrection will improve your mental health and make you a better person, so you should believe it, even though it might not have happened. It says Jesus actually rose from the dead. This is a historical fact, and this fact changes everything about reality. If the resurrection didn't happen, the Apostle Paul wrote in his letter to the Corinthians, then our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. We are then found to be false witnesses about God. Your faith is futile. You are still in your sins. Truth matters to Christianity itself. The same is true across religions. Islam doesn't say, pretend Muhammad received revelations because it's psychologically beneficial. It says Muhammad genuinely received revelations from Allah. These revelations are recorded in the Quran, and they're the final perfect message from God to humanity. Buddhism doesn't say, act as if there's no permanent self because it's therapeutically useful. It says there genuinely is no permanent self. This is the nature of reality, and understanding this truth is essential to liberation. So if we adopt the pragmatic approach, we're not really taking religions seriously on their own terms. We're treating them as something other than what they claim to be. We're reducing them to psychology, sociology, ethics, or self-help. That might be fine if you think religions are nothing more than human inventions, but then you're not saying all religions are true. You're saying they're all false in their metaphysical claims, but useful in their practical effects. Second, if we're only judging religions by their practical effects, their consequences in the real world, then we have to be brutally honest about the bad effects too. Religion has inspired breathtaking acts of love, sacrifice, and heroism throughout history. It has also inspired crusades, inquisitions, holy wars, terrorism, oppression, persecution, and countless acts of violence and cruelty. If we're going to credit religion when it produces good outcomes, we have to blame it when it produces bad ones. And here's the problem. We'd need some standard outside of religion itself to judge which outcomes are good and which are bad. We'd need to appeal to ethics, human rights, well-being, or some other criterion. But if we have that external standard, then religion itself isn't the source of our values. We're using our pre-existing moral intuitions to evaluate religions, which means we've already moved beyond saying the religions themselves are what make things true or valuable. Moreover, the same religion can inspire both good and evil in different people or different contexts. Christianity inspired Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement and also inspired the Ku Klux Klan. Islam inspired beautiful poetry, architecture, and philosophy during the Islamic Golden Age and also inspires modern terrorists. Hinduism inspires profound philosophy and spiritual seeking and also maintained the caste system that oppressed millions. Buddhism teaches nonviolence and compassion, but Buddhist nationalists in Myanmar have participated in ethnic cleansing. So judging religions purely by their practical effects does not give us a clear answer about which religion is true or whether all are equally valid. It just shows that humans can use any ideology, religious or otherwise, to justify both beautiful and terrible actions. Third, this pragmatic approach makes religion nothing more than a psychological tool, like therapy or meditation or exercise. But most believers would find this deeply unsatisfying and even offensive. They don't pray to a God they think is imaginary just because prayer has stress-reducing benefits. They don't follow moral laws they believe are human inventions just because those laws promote social cohesion. They don't believe in an afterlife just because it provides comfort in the face of death. The truth of their beliefs matters profoundly to them. It's not just about utility, it's about reality. Here's a thought experiment that makes this clear. Imagine you deeply love someone, and they tell you they love you too. You build your life around this relationship. Then one day you discover they don't actually love you at all. They never did. They're just pretending because it's psychologically beneficial for them to be in a relationship, because being with you serves their purposes. Would you be satisfied with that? Would you say, well, as long as the relationship serves a useful function, who cares if the love is real? Of course not, because truth matters, especially about the things we care most deeply about. And religious believers care deeply about whether their beliefs are true, not just whether they're useful. But this raises an interesting question. Maybe the problem is that we're thinking about religious truth too rigidly, too black and white. Maybe there's a way that apparently contradictory claims can both capture important truths. Let's explore that possibility. Chapter 5. The Elephant and the Blind Men. There's a famous parable, originating in India and used across cultures, that gets cited constantly in discussions about religious pluralism. I've heard it at interfaith dialogues, read it in books defending tolerance, seen it in countless online discussions. It goes like this. Several blind men encounter an elephant for the first time. Each approaches the elephant from a different direction and touches a different part of its body. The first blind man touches the elephant's trunk and declares, "An elephant is long and flexible, like a snake." The second touches one of the elephant's legs and says, "No, an elephant is sturdy and cylindrical, like a tree trunk." The third touches the elephant's side and insists, "You're both wrong. An elephant is large and flat, like a wall." The fourth grabs the elephant's tail and argues, "An elephant is thin and rope-like." The fifth feels the elephant's ear and concludes, "An elephant is broad and thin like a fan." And the sixth touches the elephant's tusk and says, "An elephant is hard and smooth like a spear." The blind men argue with each other, each insisting their description is correct and the others are wrong. But of course, from the perspective of someone who can see the whole elephant, they're all partially right. They're each accurately describing the part they're touching. Their descriptions seem contradictory because each man has only grasped a piece of the truth. None of them sees the complete picture. The moral of the story is supposed to be clear and compelling. Different religions are like the blind men, each grasping part of the truth about God or ultimate reality or the nature of existence, but none seeing the whole elephant. They seem to contradict each other, but they're all touching different aspects of the same divine reality. It's a compelling story. It sounds wise and humble and tolerant. It seems to solve our problem neatly, but it has a fatal flaw, and once you see this flaw, the whole argument collapses. Notice the perspective from which the parable is told. We, the listeners, can see the whole elephant. We can see that the blind men are all partially correct because we have a privileged, God's eye viewpoint that they lack. We're not blind like them. We can see the entire elephant and understand how each man's limited perspective gives them an incomplete but not entirely wrong picture. But here's the devastating question. If we apply this parable to religion, who has the privileged viewpoint? Who can see the whole elephant of divine truth? Who can stand outside all religious perspectives and declare authoritatively that all religions are partial glimpses of the complete truth? Certainly not any of the religions themselves. They're supposed to be the blind men in the story, limited by their particular historical and cultural perspectives. The person telling the parable, the person using this story to argue for religious pluralism, is claiming to have the very complete knowledge they say is impossible for anyone to have. They are claiming to stand outside and above all religious traditions and see the truth that religious believers themselves cannot see. That's not humility. That's claiming the perspective of God, the only being who could actually see all religions from outside and judge which parts are true. It's claiming epistemic superiority over billions of believers while pretending to be humble and inclusive. Think about it. If you're a Christian and someone tells you this parable, they're essentially saying, you think you have the truth, but really you only have a small piece of it, and I can see that because I have the full picture that you lack. That's not treating religions with respect or equality. That's claiming to be more enlightened than all of them. Moreover, the parable only works if the blind men's descriptions are all true in some sense, just incomplete. One says like a snake, another says like a tree, another says like a wall. These descriptions can all be accommodated because they're describing different parts of the same object. They're compatible once you understand their partial perspectives. But religious claims aren't like that. We're not dealing with God is love versus God is justice, claims that could both be true about different attributes of the divine. We're not dealing with God caring about humanity versus God is transcendent, ideas that can be held together. We're dealing with there is one God versus there are many gods versus there is no God. There is a permanent self versus there is no permanent self. Jesus is God versus Jesus is not God. Reincarnation happens versus reincarnation doesn't happen. These are not partial perspectives on the same reality that can all be true once we see the big picture. They're contradictory claims about what reality is. It would be more accurate to have one blind man say, I'm touching an elephant, another say, I'm touching a Volkswagen, a third say, I'm touching a horse, and a fourth say, there's nothing here at all, I'm not touching anything. They can't all be right, no matter how sincere they are, no matter how limited their perspective is, no matter how much we want to validate everyone's experience. The elephant parable assumes what it's trying to prove. It assumes there is a single divine reality that all religions are attempting to describe. But that's precisely what's in question. Maybe different religions aren't describing the same thing at all. Maybe some are describing something real and others are describing illusions. Maybe one religion has the right elephant and the others are touching different animals entirely. Or maybe there's no elephant at all, and everyone is just feeling around in the dark, interpreting their experiences in ways shaped by culture and psychology. The parable doesn't solve our problem, it just pushes it back one level and requires even more presumption to maintain. So we need to look for more sophisticated approaches, and there is one worth considering seriously. Chapter 6. The Partial Truth Option. Let's consider a more nuanced and intellectually honest position. Maybe religions aren't completely true or completely false, but instead contain varying mixtures of truth and error. Maybe they get some things right and other things wrong. Maybe truth is distributed unevenly across different traditions. This seems almost obvious when you think about it. Most complex belief systems throughout history contain some accurate insights and some mistakes. Ancient Greek philosophy got a lot right about logic, ethics, and political theory, but was spectacularly wrong about physics and astronomy. Medieval alchemy correctly identified that substances could be transformed through chemical processes, but was wrong about transmuting lead into gold. Early medicine correctly understood that diet and lifestyle affect health, but incorrectly believed diseases were caused by imbalanced humors in the body. So why should religion be any different? Why would we expect any human institution or tradition, no matter how ancient or revered, to be correct about everything? Couldn't Christianity be right that there's a personal God who cares about humanity, but wrong about the Trinity? Couldn't Hinduism be right that consciousness is somehow fundamental to reality, but wrong about reincarnation and the caste system? Could Buddhism be right about the psychological causes of suffering, but wrong about the non-existence of a permanent self? Couldn't Islam be right about the importance of submission to divine will, but wrong about Muhammad being the final prophet? This partial truth view is more intellectually honest than perennialism or pure pragmatism. It doesn't require us to pretend contradictions aren't contradictions. It acknowledges that different religions make genuinely different claims, and that logic requires some of those claims to be false if others are true. It takes the specific content of religions seriously, rather than dissolving everything into vague spirituality. And it matches how we evaluate claims in every other domain of human inquiry. But this view comes with its own significant challenges, and we need to face them squarely. First and most importantly, this approach requires us to have some standard, some criterion, some method outside of religion itself to judge which parts are true and which parts are false. We'd need to use philosophy to evaluate logical consistency. We'd need science to test empirical claims about the physical world. We'd need historical scholarship to assess claims about events in the past. We'd need personal experience and intuition to evaluate spiritual practices. We'd need ethical reasoning to judge moral teachings. We'd need comparative analysis to see which ideas appear across traditions and which are unique. But once we're doing all that, we're no longer treating religions as authoritative divine revelations that we accept on faith. We're treating them as human attempts to understand reality, attempts that contain wisdom but also reflect the limitations, biases, and errors of the humans who created them. We become the judges of religion rather than religion being the judge of us, and that's a coherent position. But it's not all religions are true. I'm using my own reason and judgment to extract what seems true from various religious traditions. Second, most religions don't present themselves as partial truth. They present themselves as revelation from the divine, as ultimate truth, as the way things really are. A devout Muslim doesn't believe the Quran contains truth mixed with error. The Quran presents itself as the perfect, unchanged, final word of God. A committed Christian doesn't think the resurrection probably happened, and maybe Jesus was divine. Christianity requires belief in these core claims. An Orthodox Hindu doesn't consider the Vedas to be partially inspired texts with some good ideas. They're considered Shruti, revealed knowledge, eternal truth. These traditions demand complete commitment and total trust precisely because they claim to be completely true. They claim divine authority. To pick and choose which parts to accept is to reject their own self-understanding and authority. You're essentially creating your own custom religion, your own personal synthesis of ideas that you find compelling or convincing. Third, and this is crucial, who gets to decide which parts are true and which are false? You, me, a council of scholars, a democratic vote, our own intuitions and preferences? And on what basis? If I think reincarnation makes sense, but you think it doesn't. If you find the resurrection plausible, but I don't. If we disagree about whether there's one God or many, how do we resolve these disagreements? We're back to the fundamental problem of how we determine truth about metaphysical and religious claims. And that's an incredibly difficult problem. We don't have a religious particle accelerator to test these hypotheses. We can't run controlled experiments on the afterlife. We can't observe reincarnation or resurrection or divine revelation the way we can observe chemical reactions or planetary motion. That said, this partial truth approach is probably the most defensible position for someone who is uncommitted to any particular religious tradition. It acknowledges that religions contain genuine insights about human nature, morality, meaning, and perhaps metaphysical reality, while also acknowledging that they contain culturally conditioned ideas, outdated cosmology, historical errors, and contradictory claims that can't all be true. But here's what's fascinating. Once you adopt this approach, you realize something important. The question of whether all religions are true is actually less interesting than we thought, because what we're really asking, what we're really grappling with, is a deeper set of questions about the nature of truth, knowledge, and reality itself. Let's dig into that. Chapter 7. The real question beneath the question. Here's what I've come to realize after years of thinking about this topic and discussing it with people of many different backgrounds and beliefs. When people ask, can all religions be true, they're usually not really asking a purely logical or philosophical question. They're asking something deeper, something more personal, something more emotionally and socially charged. What they're really asking is this: how can I respect people of different faiths without feeling like I'm calling them wrong or stupid? How can I avoid being arrogant about my own beliefs when billions of intelligent, sincere, good people believe something completely different? How can I maintain my own convictions while acknowledging the possibility that I might be mistaken? How can I have strong beliefs without becoming intolerant or closed-minded? How can I navigate a diverse, pluralistic world where I work with, live near, and form friendships with people whose worldviews contradict my own? These are profoundly important questions. These are the questions that actually keep people up at night. These are the tensions people feel in their daily lives. But we've been trying to answer these legitimate social and emotional questions with logic that doesn't work. We've been trying to solve a problem about respect, humility, and coexistence by claiming that contradictory things can somehow all be true. And that approach fails because it's based on a logical impossibility. Here's the key insight that changes everything. You can believe your religion is true, you can think other religions are mistaken, and you can still deeply respect people who believe differently. You can believe someone is wrong about something important without thinking they're stupid, evil, or worthy of contempt. You can maintain strong convictions while remaining intellectually humble about your ability to grasp ultimate truth with complete certainty. Think about how this works in other areas of life. In science, researchers have strong convictions about their theories and hypotheses. They dedicate their lives to proving their ideas are correct. They engage in vigorous debates, sometimes heated arguments, about whose interpretation of the data is right. But the best scientists also know that they could be wrong. They remain open to new evidence. They change their minds when the data demands it. They can be confident in their conclusions while acknowledging the limitations of current knowledge. Strong belief and intellectual humility aren't opposites. They can coexist. In fact, the deepest thinkers often hold their beliefs with both passion and humility simultaneously. They're convinced of what they think is true, but they're also aware of how much they don't know, how complex these questions are, and how often humans have been confident and wrong throughout history. The same principle can and should apply to religious belief. A Christian can believe with all their heart that Jesus is the Son of God, that he died and rose again, that salvation comes through faith in him. They can base their entire life on this belief. They can find it so compelling, so explanatory, so transformative that they can't imagine it being false. And simultaneously, they can acknowledge with intellectual honesty that they could be wrong, that Muslims have their own reasons for believing what they believe, that Hindus have sophisticated philosophical traditions supporting their worldview, that atheists raise legitimate challenges that deserve serious responses. A Buddhist can be committed to the path the Buddha taught while acknowledging that consciousness is mysterious, that metaphysical questions are difficult, that other traditions offer insights worth considering. A Muslim can submit fully to Allah while remaining humble about the limits of human understanding of the divine. Moreover, and this is crucial, respect for persons doesn't require accepting all beliefs as equally true or equally valid. You can deeply respect someone as a person, value their dignity, their experiences, their contributions to the world, treat them with kindness and fairness, while believing they're mistaken about important matters. We do this all the time in other contexts. I can respect my friend who believes in astrology while thinking astrology is nonsense. I can value my colleague who supports a different political party while thinking their policies are misguided. I can love my family member who believes in conspiracy theories while thinking those theories are false. Disagreement about beliefs doesn't require disrespect for persons. The real tension, the actual problem people are trying to solve when they ask if all religions can be true, isn't logical. It's social and psychological. We live in diverse, interconnected societies. We share workplaces with people of different faiths. We have neighbors who worship differently. We form friendships with people whose worldviews contradict our own. Our children play with children being raised with completely different religious stories. We don't want to constantly feel like we're at odds with people we care about. We don't want to think of ourselves as intolerant or judgmental or closed-minded. We don't want to appear arrogant, claiming we have all the answers when we're often deeply uncertain ourselves. And we certainly don't want to contribute to the religious conflicts, prejudices, and violence that have caused so much suffering throughout history. So we reach for the comforting idea that all religions are basically true. All paths lead to the same destination. All sincere seekers will arrive at the same truth. It feels generous. It feels open-minded. It feels peaceful. It feels like what a good, tolerant, modern person should believe. But it's built on a logical foundation that crumbles under any serious examination. The more honest approach, the approach that actually works, is harder but ultimately more satisfying and more respectful of everyone involved. It goes something like this. I believe certain things about the nature of reality. I believe them because they seem to me to be true, based on my experiences, my reasoning, the evidence I've encountered, the traditions I've inherited, the insights I've gained. I take these beliefs seriously. They shape how I live. They matter to me. But I also recognize that I'm a finite human being with limited knowledge and limited perspective. I could be wrong about some things, maybe even fundamental things. Other people believe very different things, also for reasons that make sense to them. They're not stupid or evil for believing differently. They might be right, and I might be wrong. Or we might both be partially wrong. Or maybe I'm right after all. I don't know with absolute certainty. But I'm going to live according to what seems true to me while remaining open to evidence, argument, and experiences that might change my mind. And I'm going to treat people who disagree with me with respect, dignity, and kindness, because their value as human beings doesn't depend on having correct beliefs. This is harder than saying all religions are true. It requires living with uncertainty and ambiguity. It requires the discomfort of genuine disagreement. It requires intellectual humility combined with personal conviction. It requires holding strong beliefs while acknowledging fallibility. But here's what's remarkable. This approach actually produces more interesting conversations, deeper mutual understanding, and more genuine respect than the easy pluralism that papers over real differences. When you take someone's beliefs seriously enough to engage with them honestly, even when you disagree, you're showing real respect. When you acknowledge that you could learn something from traditions different from your own, even while maintaining your own commitments, you're being genuinely open-minded. When you can say, here's what I believe and why, and here's why I think your view is mistaken, but I absolutely respect you as a person and value your perspective, you're navigating pluralism with both honesty and grace. So where does all this leave us? What's the actual answer to our question? Chapter 8. Living with the Answer. Let me bring all of this together and give you the clearest answer I can. Can all religions be true? In any straightforward, logically coherent sense, the answer is no. Religions make contradictory claims about fundamental aspects of reality. Either Jesus is God incarnate or he isn't. Either the self is eternal or it's an illusion or it's created at birth. Either there's one God, many gods, or no God at all. Either reincarnation happens or it doesn't. Either Muhammad received genuine divine revelation or he didn't. These claims can't all simultaneously correspond to reality. That's not intolerance or closed-mindedness. That's basic logic, the law of non-contradiction. The popular attempts to reconcile these contradictions all fail when examined carefully. Perennialism, the idea that all religions are describing the same truth in different ways, requires ignoring what religions actually teach and claiming a privileged perspective none of us actually have. Pragmatism, the idea that truth doesn't matter as long as religions work, abandons what religions claim about themselves, and leaves us without criteria for judging when religion produces good versus harmful outcomes. The elephant and blind men parable assumes what it needs to prove and commits the same presumption it claims to avoid. These approaches feel good, but they don't hold up intellectually. Could religions contain partial truths, getting some things right and other things wrong? Absolutely. This is probably the most defensible position, but it requires us to stand in judgment over religions rather than treating them as ultimate authorities. It requires using reason, evidence, and other criteria to separate truth from error. We become the judges rather than accepting religious claims on divine authority. And at that point, we're not saying all religions are true. We're saying we're using our own judgment to extract insights from various traditions. Now, here's what's important to understand. The fact that religions contradict each other doesn't tell us which, if any, is actually correct. Maybe one religion has it essentially right. Maybe they're all wrong in different ways. Maybe there are truths scattered across multiple traditions that, when properly understood, aren't actually contradictory after all. Maybe the divine reality, if there is one, is so far beyond human comprehension that all our religious claims are like children's drawings trying to represent quantum physics, sincere attempts to capture something real, but vastly simplified and inevitably distorted by our limited understanding. The honest answer is, we don't know with absolute certainty. We can't step outside our own limited perspectives to see reality with perfect clarity. We can't run definitive experiments on metaphysical claims. We're finite beings trying to understand infinite questions. But, and this is crucial, we don't know with certainty doesn't mean therefore all claims are equally valid or equally likely to be true. It just means we should approach these questions with both conviction and humility. What does this mean practically? How should we live with these conclusions? First, be honest about disagreement. Don't pretend differences don't exist or don't matter in order to avoid social awkwardness. Real respect means taking people seriously enough to acknowledge when you genuinely disagree with them. When someone tells you about their faith, don't respond with vague affirmations like, "Oh, that's your truth," or "we're all climbing the same mountain." Either engage seriously with what they're saying or politely acknowledge the difference without pretending it away. Second, hold your own beliefs with conviction and humility simultaneously. You can believe something strongly while acknowledging you could be wrong. You can commit your life to a particular path while remaining open to correction. You can have reasons for what you believe while recognizing those reasons might not convince everyone. Strong faith and intellectual humility aren't enemies. They're partners. Third, respect persons without necessarily respecting all beliefs. Every human being has inherent dignity and worth. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, fairness, and compassion. But beliefs themselves can be true or false, wise or foolish, helpful or harmful. You can honor someone's humanity while thinking their beliefs are mistaken. You can value someone's experience while disagreeing with their interpretation of that experience. Fourth, stay curious. Learn about traditions different from your own. Read their scriptures. Talk to their practitioners. Try to understand why billions of intelligent people find these worldviews compelling. You might discover insights that enrich your own understanding. You might encounter challenges to your beliefs that force you to think more deeply. You might find common ground in unexpected places, or you might just gain appreciation for the diversity of human attempts to make sense of existence. Fifth, focus on questions rather than just answers. The question, "Can all religions be true?" leads us to much more interesting questions. What is truth and how do we recognize it? How much can human beings actually know about ultimate reality? What's the relationship between reason and revelation, between faith and evidence? How should we navigate disagreement about profound matters? What does it mean to be open-minded without being empty-minded? These questions don't have simple answers, but wrestling with them makes us more thoughtful human beings. Sixth, be willing to live with uncertainty. The desire for all religions to be true often comes from a desire for certainty, for everything to be resolved neatly. But existence is more ambiguous than that. We don't have all the answers. We're not going to figure everything out. Some questions will remain open, and that's okay. You can live a meaningful, purposeful, committed life without having absolute certainty about metaphysics. Finally, remember that what matters most isn't just believing the right things. It's living well. It's treating others with compassion. It's seeking truth wherever it leads. It's being honest with yourself and others. It's growing in wisdom, kindness, and understanding. Every religious tradition and every secular philosophy would agree on these basics, even if they disagree about the metaphysical foundations. The question, "Can all religions be true?" pushes us toward difficult but important realizations. That truth matters and can't be relativized away without losing meaning. That logic places constraints on what can be simultaneously true. That respect for persons doesn't require accepting all beliefs as valid. That conviction and humility can coexist. That we can navigate diversity with both honesty and grace. These are hard truths in an age that prizes easy tolerance over difficult thinking. But they're truths worth embracing if we care about intellectual honesty, genuine understanding, and real respect. First, be honest about disagreement. Don't pretend differences don't exist or don't matter in order to avoid social awkwardness. Real respect means taking people seriously enough to acknowledge when you genuinely disagree with them. When someone tells you about their faith, don't respond with vague affirmations like, "Oh, that's your truth," or "We're all climbing the same mountain." Either engage seriously with what they're saying or politely acknowledge the difference without pretending it away. Second, hold your own beliefs with conviction and humility simultaneously. You can believe something strongly while acknowledging you could be wrong. You can commit your life to a particular path while remaining open to correction. You can have reasons for what you believe while recognizing those reasons might not convince everyone. Strong faith and intellectual humility aren't enemies. They're partners. Third, respect persons without necessarily respecting all beliefs. Every human being has inherent dignity and worth. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, fairness, and compassion. But beliefs themselves can be true or false, wise or foolish, helpful or harmful. You can honor someone's humanity while thinking their beliefs are mistaken. You can value someone's experience while disagreeing with their interpretation of that experience. Fourth, stay curious. Learn about traditions different from your own. Read their scriptures. Talk to their practitioners. Try to understand why billions of intelligent people find these worldviews compelling. You might discover insights that enrich your own understanding. You might encounter challenges to your beliefs that force you to think more deeply. You might find common ground in unexpected places, or you might just gain appreciation for the diversity of human attempts to make sense of existence. Fifth, focus on questions rather than just answers. The question, "Can all religions be true?" leads us to much more interesting questions. What is truth, and how do we recognize it? How much can human beings actually know about ultimate reality? What's the relationship between reason and revelation, between faith and evidence? How should we navigate disagreement about profound matters? What does it mean to be open-minded without being empty-minded? These questions don't have simple answers, but wrestling with them makes us more thoughtful human beings. Sixth, be willing to live with uncertainty. The desire for all religions to be true often comes from a desire for certainty, for everything to be resolved neatly. But existence is more ambiguous than that. We don't have all the answers. We're not going to figure everything out. Some questions will remain open, and that's okay. You can live a meaningful, purposeful, committed life without having absolute certainty about metaphysics. Finally, remember that what matters most isn't just believing the right things. It's living well. It's treating others with compassion. It's seeking truth wherever it leads. It's being honest with yourself and others. It's growing in wisdom, kindness, and understanding. Every religious tradition and every secular philosophy would agree on these basics, even if they disagree about the metaphysical foundations. The question, "Can all religions be true?" pushes us toward difficult but important realizations. That truth matters and can't be relativized away without losing meaning. That logic places constraints on what can be simultaneously true. That respect for persons doesn't require accepting all beliefs as valid. That conviction and humility can coexist. That we can navigate diversity with both honesty and grace. These are hard truths in an age that prizes easy tolerance over difficult thinking, but they're truths worth embracing if we care about intellectual honesty, genuine understanding, and real respect. Conclusion. So let's wrap this up. Can all religions be true? No. Not if we're using true in any meaningful sense. Religious traditions make contradictory claims at fundamental levels about the nature of God, the soul, salvation, and reality itself. Logic doesn't allow contradictory propositions to all be accurate descriptions of the same reality. That's not intolerance. That's not arrogance. That's not closed-mindedness. That's just facing facts, honestly. But that's not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of a richer, more honest one. Rather than pretending differences don't exist to make ourselves feel tolerant and open-minded, we can acknowledge them and then do the genuinely hard work of figuring out what we actually believe and why. We can approach other religions with real curiosity rather than false equivalence. We can have authentic disagreements with authentic respect. We can maintain personal convictions while practicing intellectual humility. Most importantly, we can stop using the comforting myth that all religions are true as a shortcut to avoid the difficult questions about truth, meaning, and reality that human beings have wrestled with for thousands of years. Because those questions matter. They deserve serious thought. They deserve better than easy answers that collapse the moment we examine them carefully. The search for truth, real truth, not feel-good platitudes or wishful thinking, but actual correspondence with reality, is one of the most profound and important human endeavors. It's what separates us from animals. It's what drives philosophy, science, art, and yes, religion itself. And it deserves our full intellectual effort, our honesty, our rigor, and our humility. The world would be simpler if all religions were true. We could validate everyone, offend no one, and live in perfect harmony. But the world isn't simple. Reality is complex. Truth is demanding. And honest engagement with that complexity and that demand makes us better thinkers, better conversationalists, and ultimately better human beings. If this deep dive into one of philosophy's most challenging questions changed how you think about truth, belief, and religious diversity, smash that like button and subscribe to Logic Over Spirit. We tackle the hard questions about reason, faith, and reality that most channels won't touch. We don't do surface-level content here. We go deep. We think critically, and we never sacrifice truth for comfort. Drop a comment below and let's continue this conversation. Do you think all religions can be true? Has your perspective shifted after watching this? What's your best argument for or against religious pluralism? Do you think it's possible to respect people while disagreeing with their beliefs? Or does disagreement inherently show disrespect? I read every single comment, and honestly, the best philosophical discussions happen in the comment section. That's where we really dig into these ideas together. And if you want to continue exploring these questions, check out our video on Does God Exist? The Strongest Arguments from Both Sides, where we examine theistic and atheistic arguments with the same rigorous approach. Or watch Why Smart People Believe Strange Things to understand the psychology behind belief formation. Links are in the description, along with recommended books and resources for further reading. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Someone who's wrestling with questions about faith and doubt. Someone who's trying to navigate religious diversity. Someone who values thinking deeply about what matters most. This is exactly the kind of conversation we need more of in our world. Remember, truth isn't found by avoiding difficult questions or pretending contradictions don't exist. It's found by facing hard realities with both courage and humility. It's found by choosing logic without losing wonder, by embracing reason without abandoning meaning. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and never stop seeking truth, wherever that search might lead you. This is Logic Over Spirit, where we believe the unexamined life isn't worth living and the unlived life isn't worth examining.